And the convener of this webinar series, and we're just really happy to have you this morning, this afternoon, this evening. We are here because we want to change the narrative in the development sector. And we thought it was really important to bring together communicators who are also in touch with the public and making more and more content into the world, and really trying to make sure that we're doing that in the best way possible. So I'm really grateful to the Global Fund for Community Foundations, which has been sponsoring this series, which started in December. I'm really grateful to Wendy Richardson, who's helping me on the technical aspect of the Zoom call, and to our wonderful, wonderful speakers. We've had just incredible people who I think are definitely on the edge of, for lack of a better term, innovating around communications and how we communicate about global issues. And just really happy to have 4 incredible people here today, also willing to share their work and what they're up to. Can everybody see and hear me okay? Yeah? I'm going to go ahead and stop my share so that I can. I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves if you're not already muted. And I'm going to pull out my notes so I can do my proper introduction. I lost them in the multiple screens. And just to begin, I wanted to say a little bit about what we can and cannot expect from our hour together. We'll be together for an hour. Welcome to people as you're joining us. Just really happy to have you here. And today we're going to hear from 4 incredible women who are doing communications very differently around the world. Francois Kupanglo Moduthe, I hope I'm saying that correctly. She is a feminist and an expert on women's rights in Africa. And she is the founder of Elia, a bilingual English and French platform that really harnesses the power of conversation to explore what it means to be an African feminist today. And she curates conversations among people that transcend their technical expertise and really delves into their lived experiences. So check out the website. I'll be sure to send the link when she begins her sharing today. Before that, she was 8 years with Girls Not Brides, which was a civil society partnership to end child marriage, and was really spearheading that work in Africa. And now she's a freelance consultant, and I'm really happy to have her here. She's a daughter of Cameroon, a French national, and she's currently living in Morocco. I'm also welcoming today Rasha Sansor from the Dahlia Association. Rasha was born in Jerusalem. She graduated from Birzeit University in 2011. She's a journalism major, and she has actually a master's degree in communication and development from the Center for International Studies at Ohio University. She works with communication and resource mobilization at the Dahlia Association, which is Palestine's community foundation. And she's really wants to use her skills to influence positive social changes in Palestine, and as well as working on the negative stereotypes that are often associated with people living in the occupied territories. And Rasha shares that in her free time, she sings a cappella music, and she does poetry and screenplays. And that's actually going to be one of the themes we carry through today, is how are we tending to our own creativity as communicators. Also welcoming Tara Sai Jangara. She's joining us from the Zambian Governance Foundation. She's worked as a journalist and editor, a public relations officer, and a communication specialist for the past 9 years. She also has a master's in communication for development from the University of Zambia, and then has a Bachelor of Arts in English and Communication from Midland State University in Zimbabwe. She's done all kinds of things, from strategy to media, but right now she's working as a communication specialist at the Zambian Governance Foundation, and she oversees everything that they're doing. She says she's a social media enthusiast who has led and managed social media campaigns, including Shift the Power Zambia, which was a specific local campaign really trying to promote philanthropy in Zambia. And in her spare time, Tara Sai enjoys traveling, dancing, and singing. So we'll see what sort of threads of creativity come through for her. And then finally, Karine Umuhumzuma is from the Malala Fund. She's here as a discussant to just sort of reflect on the three previous speakers and share some of her work. She does a lot of work at the Malala Fund. Before that, she was with DevEx, and she's done just so much. She's really all about the social media boom. And so she kind of has a digital first approach to storytelling and content creation. And I think she'll just be a great person to sort of wrap us up today. So really glad to have them all. And I thank them all for their time and passion and energy and expertise that they're willing to share with us today. And I'm really glad all of you are here. So just to sort of open us up today, I think I want to set some expectations. And let me do some sharing again. There we go. We're here to open up a conversation about what we consider old school NGO style communications, not just because those are now cliche, but because they actually do harm to people. And so we're not here to sort of blame everybody like the sector's messed up. And we've had a, poverty porn issue for a long time. But we're at a point now where we have an obligation to do better when we know better. And I actually suspect that's why there's been so much interest in this series and people really wanting to see what are some of the new approaches. So we're going to think through these issues together. I'm very clear that in bringing up these issues, we invite stuff to come up. This is imperfect conversation. This is a hard conversation sometimes, but it's essential because we're calling for accountability in our sector that doesn't, or even in our wider culture that doesn't yet exist. So I don't think we get to fix communications with the right arguments or politics. I want to grow up and be trying to error. We're here to build us in ways that don't recreate harm. So part of the why I'm hosting this is to also make visible the mistakes that I've made as a white person, or someone who identifies as white. I want to have this series because I wanted to invite people into a learning process and hear from the people that I consider to be my teachers. And I do this knowing that, those of us who are privileged within the global development sector, the philanthropy world, whatever it is, we kind of have a responsibility to, frankly, get our shit together. And so I've asked other people to come and share their perspectives from where they sit in that system. And today, this series, of course, we're not solving anything, but it's a really good start. And at the end of the day, I'm super excited because over the past 2 months, almost 2 people have signed up to be part of this. So again, thank you all for showing up today and engaging in these conversations. And let's get started. So now how to advance my thing. Here we go. So what do we mean? Before we get started with the speakers, I just want to do a little background and reflect a little bit of what we've learned so far in the series. What do we mean by changing the narrative? So below our actions and behaviors are our motivations and how we perceive the world. And sometimes the choices we make as communicators reflect rhetoric found in the political discourse. It represents sort of how we see the world. And when it comes to shift the power, when it comes to changing our practices in the social good sector, I really believe that we need new narrative frames. And in fact, in this graphic, I'm sort of showing what it has been up until now, the frame for all NGO storytelling, which is so-and-so is poor, then we gave them money or resources, and now everything's great. And all of us know in the sector that that is actually a very false equation. Social change is not linear. It takes 2 steps forward and 3 steps back often. And what happens is we sort of perpetuate stereotypes and generalizations about people. We make them identityless and helpless and incapable and desperate. And so that's why these charitable ideas, or these charitable portrayals of helping, conjure up the victim and passivity, and we're just not want to do that anymore. We're not communicating in order to validate our assistance. So we really want to counteract ideas of the other. And shift the power, of course, means different things to different people. But ultimately, we want to make sure that we're holding people in power to account, and that includes ourselves. And that's why we're here today. So what are some of the narrative frames that are shaping social good communications so far? The poor, right? Our ideas of the poor, sorry. We have over there, right? Places that are far away and aren't related to us. And the other and benevolence. And, you can read that. I think what we want to understand is that narrative frames are like these operating assumptions held by a dominant society. And when it comes to doing good or helping others, those ideas develop over time. And in all cultures, being helpful is a marker of good character, but it comes out in different ways. And in my culture, which is white and Christian and based in the US, do-gooders are almost universally venerated, right? We gain affection and approval and favor. And we see that corporations are blatantly using these ideas in their marketing efforts, right? So as communicators in this sector, we have to sort of, I think, own our own power and know that we either choose to uphold or challenge society's existing narrative frames. And what I think I want us to move to are not these things that are listed here in this slide, but really internationalism and anti-racism and interdependence, the things that are actually going to move us forward as a society. So what are some of the lessons from the series so far? I've listed a bunch here, and I wanted to focus on a couple of them today in our last series. I put this GIF of a bee, right? So bees communicate by dancing, right? There's so many other kinds of ways to communicate than the things that we default to. And so today we're going to talk about the invitation for today is to talk about two of the invitations that have come from prior in this series. I've highlighted them here. The sixth is about letting people tell their own stories on their own terms and supporting them to do that. And allowing them to do that on our platform, enabling them to do that on other platforms. This is the pass the mic moment, folks. And it is incumbent on us as communicators to think about, do our strategies actually enable this? Or are we still extracting stories from people and telling them on our own terms? So we're at a moment where we want to flip that. And so today we're going to hear from people on how they are attempting to do that. And then number 12 is our other invitation we're going to focus on a little bit today, and why we want to think about bees dancing is that a lot of the threads and the echoes I've heard as we've had this series is that we have to really retouch our own sense of creativity, because we do need new forms of storytelling. We do need new ways of looking how we do this. And it's not like there's a set box of tools I can offer the sector to say, do storytelling like this, or change this about your practices. Every nonprofit, every NGO, every team has to sort of grapple openly with this and figure out their own way. Because I'm really also very clear that you can change all the words and make everything look really pretty. But if your projects are still being developed in a hierarchical way where the people don't have a voice, I actually don't want your communications to change. Because maybe your communications really reflect the world as your organization sees it. But if you want to sort of see something new, we've got to tap into our own creativity and figure out what can help connect us to other people. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm really, really excited to offer these two questions and to turn over to Francois to begin today. Each of our speakers is going to have 5 minutes each, and I'll stop the share so you all can see them speaking, and they're going to share some of their reflections on these questions and on these two invitations. So let me move over to Francois. Welcome.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for the invitation. Do you need me to put the video on, or?
I'd love it if we could just see you for a moment at least.
What? Yes. So yes, my name is Françoise Peglo-Mudutre, and I'm the founder of Eyala, which is a platform that is online and offline that is dedicated to providing a space for African feminists to not only discuss expertise, but really build a sisterhood that is founded in shared experiences. So thank you so much for having me. I I was a bit, I had some questions about like, what am I going to say? Because, and I want to kind of explain where I come from because I am not a comms strategist. I just find myself doing comms now because I'm exploring this question, which is, what does that mean to be an African feminist today? What does that look like? And also, what does that feel like? And what is that experience? I found that the best way for me to do it was through a communications initiative. But I also wanted to say that where I'm coming from is from the place of somebody who's worked in international development for the past 10 years or so, and who's kind of exited the uh, international organizations space because I was feeling increasingly um, ill at ease with some of these narrative issues that are being explored. Um, so yeah, I think so. Something that I wanted to say first about the audience of Ayala, which is one of the questions that you were asked. In that order, the primary audience is the really African feminist activists across the African continent and in the diaspora who speak French and English because this is a bilingual site, and who are already engaged in various types of feminist work at various levels in various spaces. The secondary audience would be African women who do not necessarily consider themselves as feminists, but either intrigued or interested in what feminism is. And thirdly, is everybody else, non-Africans, non-feminists, non-women, in that order as well. So because I only have 5 minutes, I was going to just share 5 key lessons that I've learned from the work that I've been doing based on around the question of changing the narrative. And these are lessons that I've learned for myself. So I'm happy to share and have a bit of a conversation about them. The first one is, for me, is that we shouldn't try to beat the experts to be the experts. So I find that my audience has like such a wealth of expertise that there's absolutely no point in me trying to kind of over expert them, if I may say. So I think these are African women, even if they're not like engaged in a lot of technical work, they are experts about their own narrative. So I think for me, instead of trying to be an expert in their lives, my work is a lot about letting them uh, express themselves and just really asking the questions that allow them to speak about their expertise. So this is part of the reason why the blog is under the form of conversations, which I record and then I transcribe and I edit and I just put them out there as conversations. Secondly, I also think that, I mean, I happen to be also an African woman and feminist, so I think it's easier for me to connect with them, to understand them, to ask the kind of questions that are relevant. But I also find that, so for me, what that means is, if you don't have these people in your team, people whose experiences resemble those of the people whose stories you want to tell, hire them, pay them, trust them. So that's really one of the first things I wanted to say. Secondly, I think it's very linked to that. I think it's been for me very important to remove personal and organizational ego out of the equation. So really, for example, on everything that regards, especially now I see a lot more of a discussion in the sector about how do we change the narrative. And I think very often we see some urge from an organization to be the organization that is going to sort out how this is done. There's no point. It's not going to work, and I think it's actually very harmful. So I think like kind of not trying to like just really being focused on letting others on passing the mic, as you say. This is how the work is done, and not trying to either document how well you're doing it or how hard you're trying or all of that. I think for me it's very ego-centered to do that. I found it ultimately quite at the minimum distracting and at the maximum harmful. Thirdly, the lesson that I've learned over the past year and a half since launching Eyala has been not to shy away from complexity, and sometimes from being going into issues that are complicated because the experiences are complicated. I think one of the things I was most disgusted about working in and with NGOs is how we were trying to advance the agenda on one issue to really, really simplify the realities of the women who were experiencing this issue. So, for example, on the issue on child marriage, when we started working on it 10 years ago, nobody wanted to talk about child marriage. So we had to kind of show what is the life of a child bride look like. And we, without really thinking it was harmful, we started projecting this idea that a child bride is a woman, a young girl who's being always forced into marriage, kicking and screaming. And then like 5 years later, we saw research from Southern Africa that said, well, some young girl opts into child marriage because, because some other circumstances force them to do that. And I think that complexity I found was so interesting to see how many organizations and partners were resisting us saying this out loud, because now the funders were used to the initial narrative and they wouldn't fund work with child brides who had not been forced, for example. So I think not shying away from complexity is very important. In my work with Eyala, I also find that not shying from vulnerability is also important. So not shying away from saying, I don't know, from saying, I'm not sure, from saying, we need to talk about this together, think about this together. I find that it's, for me anyway, because I document other women's feminist journey as well as my own, I find that the more vulnerable I was about my own, the more I was able to earn the trust of women in telling me what I wanted to know beyond the things that they used to talk about, which is expertise. So I think if you want to access people's experiences, I think it's important to share your own and to be transparent and vulnerable about that. The last point, because I think my time is almost up, is for me, I find it extremely useful to prioritize conversation over communication. So Eyala really is a platform for conversation among African feminists. So it happens online, but it also happens in discussion circles that I host. And I find that not being focused on what I project or what information I put out, but really in being in the conversation where I listen more than I speak, has completely helped me reshape entirely what I thought I was doing when I started. So I started as, this is a space for women to share their experiences. And the more I listened, I realized what I was really trying to do, because that's what I was hearing, is there needs to be an intentional space for international development to prioritize solidarity and sisterhood. And because that space doesn't exist, this is what I'm trying to do with the Eyala. I think my time is up. So I'm hoping if I didn't cover anything, maybe I can get some questions. Thank you very much.
It's amazing, Francois. Thank you. I got so much from that, and I really agree with you that we hardly have any spaces for listening where we actually build real solidarity. So thank you for going into that space and creating it. Yeah, thanks. And we'll have more time if you have questions for Francois or about Elia. There's going to be time, everybody. I'm going to turn next to Rasha, who's calling in from Palestine. Rasha, thanks, and feel free to begin.
Thanks everyone for joining today's session. So I want to tell you a bit about Dahlia Association. It's a community foundation, and we aim to realize our rights as Palestinians to control our own resources for a Palestinian-led development. So to answer your questions, Jenny, in regarding to creativity, I intentionally make space for it because despite all the hustle and bustle at Dahlia, I try to put myself in the shoes of the reader or the viewer of my content. And I don't want them to get bored from accessing the information that I give them. So trying to make it interesting is something that I aim for. They tell us in the design school not to let the viewer think, but sometimes I think it is best to break that rule. So this way you create a sort of trust in the viewers or the reader's ability to make decisions towards the content. So, and I believe this is how you can create change. And at Dahlia, I especially do that with the fundraising content. Because today we're a bit focusing on communication also towards fundraising and giving. So for an example, we have like an infographic we created at Dahlia. It's called Make a Difference with Your Food. This infographic takes the nutrition fact table and tries to play with it and using different values such as feeling good, 13 grams, community support, 25 grams. This way we show how when you purchase a meal through this initiative, you are indeed supporting community and it's food for the soul. At the same time, we try to rename generic activities like fundraising. Instead, at Dahlia, we don't fundraise, we fundraise, we drop the D, because we believe that those who want, we believe in the participatory approach. So when people who visit our fundraising toolkit, they adopt this method and they believe in the Palestinian-led development. So all of this positive energy will benefit us in the end. At Dahlia, we also try to decolonize development narratives, and we do that by using organic communication. For example, when you look at the content of the Big Aid communicators, we call them Big Aid at Dahlia, we notice that they always edit or manipulate their content to reproduce images of the people they serve. Thus, they reproduce the roles they see them in. So, for example, when you look at rural women, you see certain set images and certain depictions, or poor children with certain, like you can even imagine the pictures that I'm talking about without having to Google them. So at Dahlia, we reproduce narratives with limited and available resources, and this demonstrates how genuine the content can be. So in regards to supporting people to tell their stories, so at Dahlia, you know, Palestinians are the main audience, and being a Palestinian myself, I come from the need to revolutionize this narrative that surrounds my people. In Western media, we are always portrayed as violent, terrorists, victims, initiators of aggression. So our identity is binary in a way. I mean, it is not without the Israelis, meaning that we never appear on the traditional media unless something happens to Israel. And there is also another narrative which we try to target. It's the narrative that stereotypes us through development. So this narrative is, it does not address the issue of the occupation of Palestine. The development organizations, they do not address the occupation of Palestine as a problem. They frame us Palestinians as poor, marginalized, with no understanding of democracy, and incapable of decision-making. So they must remedy this through grants without even discussing the topic of occupation, which causes all of these problems. So when we deconstruct the development language, we can see this power relationship with the Big Aid and those who are served. So in this regard, I believe it's my duty to shift this narrative and use more accurate terms. And by doing that, I'm mitigating this relationship of power. And one of these things is labels. Labels, I believe, are colonial and post-colonial constructs. They predefine people's roles globally. Terms such as poor neighborhoods can be avoided and instead can be replaced with detailed descriptions without judgments. So by describing and describing without even adding labels, you can illustrate context. So in one example, I heavily use descriptions to illustrate the context of a village called Wadi Fukin. And the descriptions spoke to many of our readers that they were even prompted to donate and support. And here I quote some of the responses. One lady wrote to us, "I just donated the dahlia, and I should admit that those radishes, which were mentioned in the article, really sent me scrambling for my checkbook." So in other words, we must avoid poverty porn and trust that when we describe to our readers, they will be responsive. In other words, tell things as they are. That's it. It's as simple as that. And finally, I don't know if I still have time, but I use my inspiration also from fantasy novels. And taking a quote from the book, The Never-Ending Story, there's always this sentence, "This is another story and shall be told another time." And I believe that when there is a story that I must tell, I do so. And when it is not my story, I encourage those who are involved to tell that story. And this is how we put back ownership of the narratives to the people involved. And since it is the never-ending story, I also believe that it's a never-ending process of challenging this top-down narrative of development. But it must take place until that narrative reflects the realities of the people and to tell their stories. And in the end, that we don't have to, as communicators, pass the mic, or so that they can come by themselves and tell the stories without having us to encourage them, so they can take this decision by themselves. Yeah, this is pretty much it.
Thank you, Russia. It was thank you for reminding us of the power at play when it comes to communications, and the power that we have as communicators, and the real need and desire to revolutionize this narrative. It's not for fun. It's because it actually is needed in the world. So thank you so much. And you can see, everybody, I put a lot of the examples from Dahlia and Rasha's work in the chat. So thank you. And Christina is saying the simply describing thing is very powerful for her. So thank you. Now I'm going to turn to Tarasai. So happy to have you. Welcome, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I hope everyone can hear me. Jennifer, can you hear me?
We're hearing you. We're hearing you.
Oh, okay, that's great. I'll proceed. So my background, as you highlighted earlier on, I was a journalist, and I believe I'm still a journalist. But the reason why I left journalism was because of this aspect that we're discussing today about changing the narratives. I remember when I was a journalist, we kept receiving press statements, press release from the civil society organizations, but what they were mostly focusing on was about the success stories that did not present a human face. But coming from a newsroom that was under-resourced, there was no way that we could go in the communities and talk to the real people to get the real stories. So at a certain point, I felt like, okay, what is really happening in the development sector? I think I should step outside the box and leave journalism, so that at least probably I have a chance to be talking to people. So that's how I found myself at the Zambian Governance Foundation, where I've been working for the past 4 years as the communication specialist. So already, as I was leaving the journalism sector, there were certain issues, certain narratives that I had already said, no, this is not going to work for me as a communications person. this is not how I'm going to communicate. So in terms of how I generate my ideas at the moment, I ensure that I don't work alone. We work as a team. So I ensure that we have daily meetings at the Zambian Governance Foundation, where we sit from the CEO to everyone who is in the office. We discuss issues, and just by hearing what my colleagues are thinking, that also helps me to come up with the different ideas that shape or fit into the way that I write and share my stories. So it's not a one-person bandwagon because I'm the specialist, but I also allow myself to listen to my colleagues so that I don't work alone. And what has been really important for me is to ensure that I go in the field, I meet the communities that we serve, I understand their challenges, and they also have the solutions to their problems. In this, it helps me to frame the stories in a different way, not whereby I just get reports from the organizations that we are working with and I structure my stories from there, no. But I always ensure that I also go in the field. Then the aspect around research, especially in terms of the local philanthropy work that we embarked on in the last 2 years, I have had to research, to understand what other organizations in the same field have done and what they are doing and how they have even shared their stories and how their narratives have been. And I can say the KCDF in Kenya has been a greatest resource that we have used at my organization. And we have had exchange visits to ensure that we learn from others as well. Then our own efforts as an organization, we have established what we call Bantu Network, and a network that brings together individuals and organizations of like-minded organizations where we sit, speak, and discuss different developmental issues. And from there, it also helps me to generate my ideas because I listen to their views and experience, which is really a plus for me. Then the way we have done things differently. When we had our launch for the local philanthropy work that we're doing, we ensured that we composed a song which is called Shift the Power. But in establishing this song, in composing the song, we did not hire experts or artists in the industry. It was the own ZGF team that sang the song from creating the lyrics, and I was doing the directing of the video that I've just shared for those who would want to watch. So that sort of really helped in presenting our information differently and ensuring that our audience, they really understood like what we're on about. And it's a song that has been used by different institutions to speak about local resource mobilization. And the issue of theater has been really effective for us, whereby we are tired of presentations. We are tired of PowerPoint presentations, even the way we relate with the different audiences that we serve. We can tell like you have people paying attention just for a short while, then they leave before you even like finish if you're having a workshop or an event, they leave before you finish. So we have tried to make sure we use theater in presenting an issue. And this has seen like different issues being broken down in a way that is understood by everyone. So I think it's also important in terms of how we have tried to shift the power and to change the narrative. And by just talking about the challenges that we have been facing, the multitude of languages that are used in Zambia, it makes it really difficult for people to get the message, because in the absence of a common language, usage of colonial language in transmitting developmental stories is really a challenge. The stories they have sort of a disempowering effect, as local people do not understand what we have produced and and in that regard, we also don't have resources to be translating everything as much as we try. But also we have ensured that we consider using a variety of visual mediums, such as videos, photography, infographics, even cartoons, in terms of how we share our information. Yeah, I think that's what I have to say for now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tadasai. Thank you for bringing in all the different kinds of products you're doing and reminding us, in fact, that this can never be done alone. You know, ultimately, often as communicators in smaller organizations, we might be teams of 1 or 2, but we can't do this alone. And for any funders that are listening, please fund more translation. It is really important. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm just going to hand over to Corinne now to kind of pull the threads together and wrap up and share her reflections. Welcome, Corinne.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Francoise, Rasha, and Terasai for your comments. I think a lot of what you said really resonated with me in my own kind of conversations that I've had with colleagues, and also in the thoughts that I've had on this issue. I know when I first joined the global development space, I think I was really hesitant to even stay in this space, because I was like, as an African woman, a refugee, and also just a survivor of genocide, like, could I stay in this space that talks about the people that I know and like my own community in this way? And so I really had kind of a push-pull with staying in the field, because I was like, I don't know if I can be the same person who's perpetrating these same kind of these storylines and narratives about communities and people in my family as well. So I'm excited that we are at a place where this discussion is changing. I think changing in a much faster pace than it has been. And I think my takeaway really is that this work, as Jennifer has said, has to be intentional. And for some organizations, I think that it will take much longer for that to happen. And for some of the organizations that are a little bit more nimble, and it can happen a lot quicker. But I think it's really about it being intentional in both really explosive ways, but also in subtle ways, in the conversations that we're having in our meetings and our strategy, as we think of how our organizations are going to grow and the legacies that our organizations are going to leave behind. And so I don't want to reiterate or repeat any of the comments made by the previous presenters, but I think the threads that kind of came out for me was that as a community, I think what I heard from each of them is that we still do too much translation, and our work on it really becomes more authentic. Sorry, I didn't put my video on. Our work really becomes more authentic as we work towards storytelling that is unfiltered and also unprocessed. So for different organizations, this can look like many different things. Like this can look at like removing some of the barriers that when it comes to story collection. I know you mentioned, the last presenter mentioned thinking about language. Like, what are some of the barriers that we have as we sit at HQ about collecting stories from the field? Is it translating so that that people can communicate in their mother tongue? And so what if people have to read subtitles? They can read a subtitle on a video. We can add some of those things that make it more authentic. And also just having less, I know working in communication departments, having less rigid guidelines about what our story formats are. I think oftentimes we have these like formats of like, this is what a blog post look like, this is what a video should look like. So removing some of those and letting some of that be co-created. I realize that definitely takes more time, and it means the editorial process and stories can take more time to be put together, but really having a back and forth and letting it look more like a co-creation process as well. And I think that's something that we're really working to do with Malala at Malala Fund. I think where we do this best, and we definitely have work to do, I think with our grantees, but I think where we do this best is with the girls storytelling that we do. We have a platform called Assembly, which is focused on girls, and girls really just are able to submit their stories. They submit poems, they submit kind of like diaries of what their days look like, and we try really hard to not filter that. Sometimes we send questions and they're like, these aren't really these aren't things that I talk to my friends about. And we're like, oh, okay. Also, we have to realize that a lot of us on the team are in a different generation. Gen Z is talking about different things. They see the world in such a different way than the folks on our team. So we're trying to think of questions for teenage girls, and we're not teenage girls. So we really let them inform us what the questions should look like and things they actually want to talk about. They're like, I actually don't want to talk about that. So we let them inform us. So really removing those barriers and doing less translation is one of the threads that came out. And the other thread that came out for me, I think, is having more alignment across our organizations. I think a lot of us on this call are communications professionals, but the work that we do touches every single department. So having more alignment so that if the comms team is moving in this direction of really putting more power and passing the mic, our development team should also be thinking in those terms, and the way that they're talking to donors and reaching out to partnerships we should speak the same language. We should speak in a similar tone and a similar style. For us at Malala Fund, I think one of the things, our editorial philosophy is really one that carries across the whole organization. And what we've decided is that our attitude and towards our work and the tone that we speak in is hopeful and ambitious. We realize the work is complex and it is hard, but we don't think that our language has to reflect that. I think, so we're really working to make sure that when our supporters and the girls we serve, and also like the general public learning about our issues, knows that we're excited about this work, but then also that there's hope and there's ambition in this work. So we realize that girls can achieve amazing things when they're given the tools to grow. And so we speak in that language, and that language kind of carries in every part of the writing that we do across our organization, whether it's research papers, whether it's blog posts, whether it's pitch decks when we're reaching out to partners. And also that it's ambitious. We want to provoke action, not guilt or pity. So we also realize that the girls that we serve have high goals for themselves, but we also have high expectations for the leaders and the influencers that we're interacting with to help them achieve their goals. So I'm excited that this work is happening, and that we have kind of an alignment around the world. I'm excited about the work that's happening and the direction that we're moving in. But I think my challenge would be to have uncomfortable conversations and with more people. I think sometimes these conversations stay within the comms department, but speak to someone on your development team about what you're thinking about and how you want to shift this narrative. Speak to your CEO, speak to your partners, and change the tone there as well.
Thanks so much, Corinne. What a great wrap up. These are conversations that have to be had organization-wide if this is not going to just be another trend in our sector. There's the new hashtag decolonize aid, and people are already calling that into question. But this is part of that. This is part of that effort. So it's now time. I wanted to do a small exercise, but I think I'm going to skip over it and just send it to you all in the follow-up email from today. But I'm going to show it to you nonetheless. I was going to have us all become poets for a moment. I have a poem template. And I wanted to share this because in this spirit of let's get more creative, let's think differently about our world and what we're representing, I thought, people really tend to shy away from things like poetry when it comes to communicating about development. But I'm a poet, so guess what? I do always want to write poetry. And I use this sometimes in workshops, and because people can we all have a poetic heart underneath things, even if we don't communicate it. So this is an exercise that I often use to sort of get people in touch, not just with their poetic souls, but also their senses. So we talked about doing less translation, doing more description. And the way we do that is by using our bodies, our senses, what we hear, taste, smell, see. So, and if we filter those things that way through our bodies, we also have an opportunity, I think, to be less judgmental and be less reinforcing of harmful narrative frames and all the things. So I'm going to invite you all to do this later, and maybe do it with your teams, and retouch that part of yourself. Hopefully, get in touch with that creative part of yourself. But I'm going to stop, and we don't really have a lot of time. I want to save the time for questions, and I'm going to put up here everyone's contact information. And if you have questions, go ahead and chat them, or else unmute yourself and offer them up to the group. I'm sure there's lots of questions with these great presentations. So we're going to open up to Q&A now. Thanks, everybody. And okay, so Christina says, we have an interesting point about alignment across organizations. I have often found myself on the programming side trying to promote a lot of what Kareen's been talking about here, but the communications department just wanted to find some child whose mother died to bump up the Christmas donations. So yes, I mean, this is the reality. Often, I actually came to communications because I was on the program side of things and was continually disappointed by how our organization talked about this. So this is great. Repoliticizing communications is sort of what we're talking about here. Any questions from the group? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask our discussants. Or you can chat them.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, thanks, Jenny. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry, it took a while to find the unmute. Yeah, just sticking to this question about getting alignment across organizations, I wonder if any of you have any maybe success stories on how to do that, because I think that's the hardest part actually. Usually you'll have a few people that are really keen on this and that really get the idea, and it's just such a hard thing to get the whole organization behind it.
Francois, do you have any success stories? You said that you sort of left the sector a bit, having had to have those conversations a lot.
Yeah, I think my experience, and that I'm speaking now from the experience I've had working with Girls for Prize, is that it's easier when it comes from the top, because I think it's about culture change, and when culture change is so uncomfortable, I think the faster way of doing it is to going really identifying people who have the power, the reach, and really trying to convince them first. And I think you can do this through different ways. Maybe for me, I think my experience is that having them speak with the people they otherwise never have a chance to talk to, like making that connection happen repeatedly and in a way that is not extractive, I find is the most useful, at least the way I've seen things. So I would go out of my way to make sure that the elders who created Girls for Prize would directly meet with those who had experience of child marriage directly, because everything else is, as we've said, filtered, and they don't want to hear it really. So I think as much as possible, that's what I would advise.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else on the panel? I think I really tried to just own my own editorial power first as a communicator. So it's often about having a conversation with the drafter of the blog of like, you know, that sounds really paternalistic and I'm going to take it out, right? It might not have been your intention, but that's what you're communicating. So that editing process can often be an opportunity to have some, courageous conversations. And I totally understand what you say, Francois. I think there's also, in order to reach the powerful, sometimes you also need to have your allies. So there are like-minded people, no matter, and Nabera is asking, is it easier to work on this for a grassroots organization versus a larger organization? And I would say, of course, it's harder to move the ship when the ship is bigger, right? So you have to really find your like-minded folks and sort of create coalition and help people with more power understand that this is really the inevitable way that the world is going. So I'm not saying that what you're doing is wrong. I'm saying here's something ahead that maybe you don't see yet, right? So you're always sort of helping them do their job better. You're framing it as, I want to be helpful to you as a leader and let you know that this is what's coming, right? And I try to frame it that way. A couple years back on Giving Tuesday, on my blog, I'll share it in the chat, but I shared I basically templated a message for someone in the programs department who saw the Giving Tuesday appeal and was like, ew. And it's basically an email to send to your director of communications saying, thank you. I understand that communications departments are often under-resourced and overstretched, and we need to talk. And basically is inviting that conversation. So, and I will say, in terms of courageous conversations, sometimes you have it in you, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it makes sense, given where you are in the position of the organization or what energy reserves you have available, and you have to make a call. Sometimes it's hard, you can't speak up, but where we can, we should. And I think there's a whole set of skills that we all have to develop to do that better. And that's an ongoing conversation here, but I just want to offer that into the space. I want to take another question. Tanya says, I'm just feeling overwhelmed by the amount of time it takes to tell the complex story. And how do I balance frequency of communications, right? We all have to post on Facebook every day, right? Versus sharing important pictures or few words versus more complex stories. So I'd love to hear from Rasha or Tarasai. How do you balance that in your own day-to-day work?
So it is very difficult, actually. I'm just bring a more recent example. Sometimes to collect the content, it takes a lot of time, and sometimes from the program officers, they suddenly collect all the news and give them to you at once, and you don't know how to distribute your content accordingly. But there's always a plan, and there's always a way to work around that. It depends also on your audience and how much they view the content and how often they come to your page. But you should not let that prevent you from being creative and finding ways to balance this. Sometimes you can just share photos. Like for the example of Dali Association, I rely on the photo blog approach when I do my communications, because the usual cliche, the pictures were worth 1,000 words, but I know also that a picture is worth 1,000 selected words, because depending on the angle of the picture. So you have to think in a broader picture and try to find according to your strategy what you can prioritize.
Thanks. Tarasai, any insights to offer? I'll offer another question here from Neha, which is, how do you deal with sort of the urgency culture that we all have at our organizations as well?
Okay, I think in terms of communicating with different audiences, it's more important not to overwhelm your audiences and to ensure that you have a strategy on how you are going to be sharing information, your content. For example, the person who is mentioning about having a lot of pictures, at times it will be useful to know that maybe you can create a Twitter thread that can highlight the story that you are trying to put across. But it should not just be sharing for the sake of sharing because you have the pictures. Some of the information you might not use immediately, but it will still work at some point. So don't feel bad about not sharing some pictures or information that you have. Share what you consider important and what you think this is going to drive the key message out there. But also in terms of the agent's culture driven by the program team, how I have dealt with that is to ensure that as communications people, at times we make communication strategies for ourselves without involving the whole program teams, the program team. So it's to move together as an organization where communications is not seen as an afterthought or anyone can do it kind of business. So the moment people understand how the communications department operate, your priorities, the strategy that you are working on that feeds into the different projects that are going on within an organization, then it sort of helps to balance, because the team also has to be supportive, not to just push everything that to the communications person. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarsai.
Yeah.
And I always want to, Karine, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to that I think the urgency culture is always manufactured, right? I think it's always something, no one is waiting for our particular story to post on Monday at 2:00. And if you don't post it at that day, they're going to be severely disappointed. I think it's finding the moments and kind of the places where you actually add value. Especially I think with NGOs, we get caught up in these awareness days and having to put something out for those awareness days. But there is honestly such an abundance of content that people are trying to consume, whether it's the organizations they support, their own family and friends, which is all kind of mixed up in the same place. So I think to Terasai's comments is about just choosing the moments where you are adding the most value. So being really strategic about when you're posting. And then I think people these days, especially with the content, that so much content to consume, I think they value quality over quantity. So I'd rather have a really great post that I can savor and know that is coming on Fridays, and that I'm excited to read and I'm making time to read on Fridays, than having to like consume a piece of content every single day because you're pushing something out at me. And I know that's my own consumption habits, and I think kind of going more towards what other people's consumption habits are looking like.
I think so. So I'm so sorry, Navera, I've got to wrap us up. We're already over the hour, but I'm going to put back up the contact information of everybody here so that you can be in touch and keep the conversation going. These handles and websites, feel free to be in touch with me. This is the last dialogue in our series, but I really want to invite you all to this will be an ongoing. I'm thinking about, actually last dialogue, people challenged me to say, what happens after this? So I think what we'll do is try to create a monthly online salon. This is, details yet to be revealed and planned. But I think there's so much value in this space when we can grapple together and actually ask these questions. How are you dealing with the urgency culture? And have more in-depth conversations together. How do we tell these stories in new ways? Let's get together and talk about it. And maybe we could have themes, but people could just bring what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and create more solidarity and space for us to understand and support each other in this. Because I think, as Francois said, someone said today, like no one organization does this alone. So I'd love us to continue the conversation and stay tuned for that. Thank you so much to Francois, to Rasha, to Tarsai, and to Karine. I really am so grateful for your contributions today, and so grateful for all of the incredible content that you are producing, that you are sharing in the world, and for the perspectives that you bring to it, and wanting to make sure that we tell true stories. The most truthful stories by the people who are most affected, and who already have the solutions. So thank you so much. Stay in touch, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Take good care.